Immigration law is one of the two most complicated areas of American jurisprudence, American law. The two most complicated areas of American law are tax law and immigration law. Now for me, it's always been sort of interesting that the people who most need the most sophisticated legal advice with reference to taxes tend to be people with the most money and ability to pay for that higher level of sophisticated legal assistance. Whereas in immigration law, it tends to be the poorer immigrants who most need the most sophisticated assistance because many of them have gone to non-lawyers and have gotten their papers completely jumbled up or worse, and they need top-notch lawyers to, if it's possible, untangle their cases and straighten it out. But of course, those people, the least sophisticated people who need the most sophisticated help, also have the least amount of money to pay attorneys to do that. One reason why they end up in the hands of non-attorneys and make-believe attorneys and incompetent attorneys. Now, this past January, well actually 3 years ago in 2006, Congress, the House of Representatives, and the Senate took up the debate on immigration reform, changing the laws somehow. And there were people pushing for harder laws and tougher laws. And one of those proposed laws was to take what is currently, for a person who is undocumented, they're here, either they came in without papers over the border, or they came here with papers, but the papers expired. Either way, they are now, you can consider them undocumented. Right now, being here and working here without immigration authorization is a violation of American law, of course. But what many people don't realize is that it is a violation of civil law, not of criminal law. And in fact, the penalties for being here without permission or working here without permission are very similar. You know, it's fines of a few $100s or a couple $1,000s. I mean, that's similar to running a stop sign or littering in the street, etc. In other words, when the last major revision of the immigration laws occurred in the early 50s, as a society, we looked at, you know, how evil, how bad is this violation, and we assigned it a level of something equivalent to, first of all, civil violations, similar to running a stop sign, speeding, etc., not crimes. In other words, violation of the law, but not a criminal violation, a civil violation. Now, in December of 2005, and throughout 2006, there was a major debate going on in Congress as to changing the laws. And there were people pushing to change it to make it much tougher, and there were people pushing it not to make it easier, but to fix the two major problems in our immigration laws today. Which two problems I'm going to discuss in just a moment. But one of the proposals that actually passed in the House of Congress was to change the law that says being here and working here without permission, change it from being a civil violation with a few $100 or a couple $1,000s worth of fines to past misdemeanor, and we'll put it on the criminal side and go past misdemeanor and make it a felony. In other words, the guy cutting your lawn would overnight, by a change of definition in words in Congress, all of a sudden be a felon. Okay. Now, how many of you recall that in the spring of 2006, there were demonstrations in all the major cities, and including here in Stamford, by immigrants in favor of better laws? People remember that? Okay. That was in reaction to the House of Representatives passing legislation that would have not only criminalized, but felonized being here and washing dishes in a restaurant, being here and bussing the dishes off of the plate that you just ate off of in the restaurant, being here taking care of your kids, being here cleaning your house, being here cutting your lawn. Instant felons. 12 million undocumented immigrants overnight. We would triple the number of felons in the United States. Okay, so those demonstrations were partly against what the House of Representatives had done and in favor of what the Senate was going to do. Because in the Senate, there were some serious proposals to fix the two major problems in the immigration law that we have today. What are those problems? Firstly, imagine there's a fellow in France, and his dream, what he wants to do in his life, is come to the United States and cut lawns in Darien, Connecticut. This is his dream since childhood. Now I'm turning this into a little bit of a joke, but stick with me, this is to make the point. All right? Because in fact, it's not all that different. This is an exaggeration, but it's actually very similar to the truth. All right? Now, if that fellow wants to come here to the United States, there is unless he won the genetic lottery and he's lucky enough to have one of a very narrow category of family members who can sponsor him to come here, and that's perhaps 1/2 of 1% of the population of the world, unless he fits into that tiny category of immigrants or potential immigrants, people living abroad who do have that possibility of immigrating through family, there is essentially, for all practical purposes, no way for him to come here legally to cut those lawns. In the meantime, there's a lot of lawns that need to be cut, and a lot of Americans who are not willing to do that work. Okay, now I'm sure I'm going to get some questions later about that, and we'll cross that bridge when we get there. So, so Philip, don't there exist work visas for people to be able to come here and work? Answer, yes, but the problem is that there are two categories. There's one category for people who are computer programmers, medical researchers, etc., and there's 65,000 of that kind of work visa. Now, the U.S. industry has been begging Congress to expand that, and temporarily they went up to 110,000. Now they're back down to 65,000, and arguably our economy can easily use 150, 200, 300,000. And each one of those people who comes in immediately creates 5 other jobs. They're buying coffee here, they're going to a restaurant there, they're using their car, they're renting a house, etc., etc. At the other end of the spectrum, we also have 5,000 agricultural visas. In other words, if your dream is to come here and pick tomatoes, you got a small chance of getting one of the 5,000 agricultural visas. Now, also part of those visas are the people who work in the hotels in Nantucket and in Cape Cod. There's just temporary seasonal work visas. There's only 5,000 of those, and arguably we need 50,000 people to be picking our tomatoes and lettuce, and we could use more people to fill in the positions in hotels that hotels and other ski lifts, etc., are unable to find people to do. But if you don't want to pick tomatoes, and you can't or don't want to program computers and do medical research, there is, for all practical purposes, I'm choosing my language very carefully, I'm an attorney, because in fact there's these teeny-weeny little exceptions to these rules, but they're extremely difficult to meet. So for all practical purposes, there is no way for Jacques Germain in France, who wants to cut lawns in Darien, to come here. There's no way to get a work visa to be a busboy, a waiter, a cook in a restaurant. There's no way to get a visa to come here to be a carpenter, a mason. There's no way to come here to do landscaping, etc. All the jobs in between. As a matter of fact, a car mechanics, for all practical purposes, no way to come here legally. In the meantime, we have 12 million undocumented immigrants here. Approximately half of them came in over the border. The other half of them came in with visitor visas, which means they're allowed to come here, visit, and leave. There's essentially 3 kinds of visas. There's actually about 75, but they basically fall into visitor visa, tourism, student visa, come here, study, in other words, visit, gotta leave, study, gotta leave, or work visa, but only those 2 categories that I mentioned, which are about coming here to work and leaving. That's why they're called non-immigrant visas. They're not coming here to immigrate, they're coming here to accomplish whatever the goal is of the visa, and then leave. So half of the 12 million undocumented immigrants living in the United States today, by the way, that's 4% of our population. 1 out of every 25 people living in the United States is not just an immigrant, is an undocumented